And for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 19th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Fed officials signaled little appetite for reducing interest rates at their meeting last month, with most indicating they wanted to see further progress on inflation before considering more cuts, minutes show. The tech-heavy NASDAQ Composite Index rose for a second straight day, climbing 0.8%, while the S&P 500 and Dow gained 0.6% and 0.3% respectively. MSG Sports said it would explore a potential spinoff to separate its New York Knicks and New York Rangers businesses into two publicly traded companies. Beauty group Puig wrapped up 2025 with climbing sales, but cautioned that it expects growth in the fragrance market to level off. The surge in demand for data centers and nuclear power to keep them running is stressing the global uranium supply, raising concerns about a potential shortage of fuel for reactors. Palo Alto Networks lifted its full-year revenue outlook after recording a jump in second quarter profit, driven by continued demand for cybersecurity services. BAE Systems posted a 10% increase in sales for 2025, fueled by large orders for Eurofighter Typhoon jets, frigates, and combat vehicles placed by European governments. BAE is a multinational aerospace, arms, and informational service company based in London. Molson Coors logged lower profit and sales in its latest quarter as the maker of Blue Moon and Miller High Life continues to contend with softer demand for beer. Now for the highlights under the worldwide section. The U.S. is sending massive numbers of jet fighters and support aircraft to the Middle East, assembling the greatest amount of air power in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The U.S. is withdrawing all of its roughly 1,000 troops from Syria, ending a decade-long military operation in the country. A major U.S. arms package for Taiwan is in limbo, following pressure from Beijing and concerns among some U.S. officials that approving the deal would derail Trump's scheduled visit to China. Moves to bar younger teens from social media have spread across governments in Europe and Asia, as concern deepens about child welfare in a world culture of universal screen use. Meta's Mark Zuckerberg faced questions about his company's efforts to secure ever more of its users' time and attention at a landmark trial in Los Angeles. NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya will step in as acting director of the CDC in the latest shakeup of national health leadership roles. under the Trump administration. The FDA reversed course and agreed to begin a review of Moderna's application to sell a new flu shot after the company said it would do more testing in the elderly. A challenger to Representative Tony Gonzalez called for him to drop out of the primary race following allegations that he engaged in an extramarital affair with an aide who died after setting herself on fire. The picture on today's front page shows a young woman holding up the American flag behind her back as a gold medal is hanging from her neck. And that caption reads, "Red, white, blue, and gold." U.S. skier Michaela Schifrin won the women's slalom Wednesday at the Olympics in Italy, adding to golds she amassed in 2014 and 2018. The 30-year-old overcame surgery after a crash and puncture wound in 2024. And the headline reads, "Schifrin blazes to victory in Olympic comeback." Articles from the front page follow. Social media bans for youth gain momentum worldwide. Places in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. move to limit young teens' access to apps. By Sam Schechner, Paris. Moves to bar young teens from social media across Europe and Asia are going, well, viral. What started as an isolated regulatory gamble by Australia last fall has spread to more than a dozen capitals, where leaders are seizing on issues raised by childhood scrolling to appeal to parents across the political spectrum. It adds to a growing backlash against teenage smartphone use, which is being blamed by some critics for deteriorating mental health and an epidemic of screen addiction. From Paris to New Delhi, limits on children's access to apps like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube are now being debated or implemented, marking a tipping point in the conversation about regulating social media and a potential blockage in tech companies' pipeline of users. In the U.S., meanwhile, Florida said it has started enforcing a ban on social media use under age 14. And some states, including California and New York, have passed legislation requiring warning labels detailing potential harms to children and adolescents from social media apps. Instagram owner Meta Platforms and YouTube, owned by Alphabet unit Google, are currently defending themselves in a landmark civil trial in California that focuses on the potential damage caused by social media apps to teenage mental health. On Wednesday, Meta chief executive Mark Zuckerberg, in sworn testimony, defended his company's practices amid questions about his company's efforts to secure more of its users' time and attention. The CEO said Meta's growth targets reflect an aim to give users something useful, not addict them, and that the company doesn't seek to attract children as users. TikTok and Snap settled the case before trial. Lawyers for the companies have said their products aren't addictive and aren't responsible for a plaintiff's mental health issues. The age limits proposed in European countries, including the UK, France, and Austria, vary, but are generally aimed at stopping children and younger teens from accessing platforms that offers scrolling feeds of short-form videos and posts. The new initiatives reflect growing political will to address whether widespread social media and smartphone use are to blame for rising teen anxiety, depression, and self-harm, and if the best way to tackle those scourges is to block youngsters' access. In December, Australia became the first country to block access for under 16-year-olds, forcing social media companies, including Meta, TikTok owner ByteDance, and YouTube, to deactivate millions of teen social media accounts. Since then, the lower house of France's parliament passed a ban on social media users under 15, with a goal of enacting a law before the new school year. Spain is planning its ban for teens under 16. Leaders in Germany's government have backed a ban, and the UK next month is beginning a public consultation on a similar prohibition. U.S. puts most air power in Mideast since '03. Trump weighs Iran strike amid massive buildup not seen since Iraq invasion. Trump has repeatedly threatened an attack on Iran should talks fail. By Lara Sigelman, Michael R. Gordon, Alexander Ward, and Shelby Holliday, Washington. The U.S. is sending massive numbers of jet fighters and support aircraft to the Middle East, assembling the greatest amount of air power in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The U.S. is ready to take action against Iran, but President Trump hasn't decided whether to order strikes, and if he does, whether the aim would be to halt Iran's already battered nuclear program, wipe out its missile force, or try to topple the regime. Over the past few days, the U.S. has continued to move cutting-edge F-35 and F-22 fighters toward the Middle East, according to flight tracking data and a U.S. official. A second aircraft carrier loaded with attack and electronic warfare planes is on the way. Command and control aircraft, which are vital for orchestrating large air campaigns, are inbound, and critical air defenses have been deployed to the region in recent weeks. The firepower will provide the U.S. the option of carrying out a sustained, weeks-long air war against Iran instead of the one-and-done midnight hammer strike that the U.S. carried out in June against 3 Iranian nuclear sites, U.S. officials said. The buildup comes as representatives from the U.S. and Iran met in Geneva this week to negotiate a possible deal over Iranian enrichment of uranium. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said there had been a little bit of progress in those talks, but added, "We're still very far apart on some issues." Iran is expected to offer a more detailed proposal to the U.S. in the next few weeks, she said. Trump has received multiple briefings on his military options should he choose to strike, all of them designed to maximize damage to Iran's regime and its regional proxies, U.S. officials said. The options include a campaign to kill scores of Iranian political and military leaders with the goal of overthrowing the government, U.S. and foreign officials said, as well as an air attack that would be limited to striking key targets, including nuclear and ballistic missile facilities, Both would involve a potentially weeks-long operation. Trump, a Republican, hasn't yet decided whether to order strikes against Iran, the U.S. official said. Trump's national security advisors discussed Iran during a meeting in the White House Situation Room on Wednesday, according to a senior administration official. Trump has signaled he would prefer a diplomatic agreement that, if the U.S. got everything it wanted, would see Iran's nuclear programs eliminated, regional proxy forces disbanded, and ballistic missiles dismantled. Iran is seen as highly unlikely to agree to the last point, since it doesn't have much of an air force and relies on missiles as its main deterrent. Trump has indicated that he mainly cares about the nuclear issue, saying he would like Iran to stop enriching uranium. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Land grab for data centers is new obstacle to housing. Resistance grows to more land sales in Northern Virginia. They'd rather have homes than data, says one local politician. By Will Parker. Prince William County, Virginia. Steve Alloy was preparing to develop 516 new homes in Bristow, Virginia, about 5 years ago when the home builder began noticing something odd. Much of the land surrounding his site wasn't being acquired by housing developers. It was being snapped up by tech giants such as Microsoft and Google. A few miles away, a housing development called Village Place had the rights to build an additional 250 housing units, but the owner sold the land to a data center developer for $31 million. Data center developer NTT later paid $257 million for another vacant acreage. Land brokers started calling Alloy's company too. That was how we first kind of got attuned to, maybe this shouldn't be housing, said Alloy, chief executive of home builder Stanley Martin. By November of last year, the home builder was ready to cash in on the AI boom. Amazon.com, which wanted to build data centers, agreed to pay $700 million for a portion of the land Stanley Martin had acquired several years ago for just over $50 million. It was one of the biggest deals for vacant land ever. The rapid growth of artificial intelligence and the surge in construction of large data centers it requires are emerging as another potential contributor to America's housing shortage. Landowners and developers are finding that selling parcels to data center developers can be far more profitable than any other use of the land. Local zoning can make it easier and faster to build data centers than housing. Anthropic, Pentagon's woke feud escalates, by Keish Hagee, Amrith Ramkumar, Deborah Acosta, and Vera Bergengruen. When Anthropic was courting backers for its latest $30 billion funding round in recent weeks, it approached an unlikely investor, 1789 Capital, a pro-Trump venture firm where one of the president's sons is a partner. After weighing a 9-figure investment, 1789 decided not to proceed, citing ideological reasons, according to people familiar with the matter. Among its concerns were Anthropic's leader's history of criticizing President Trump, the several former Biden administration officials on its payroll, and its lobbying for artificial intelligence regulation, the people said. Anthropic had no problem raising the capital it wanted from investors, including Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, Singapore's GIC, and Coatue Management. But its spurned appeal shows that while the startup doesn't have money problems, it does have a growing political problem. The Pentagon wants to be able to use Anthropic and other AI tools for all lawful purposes. Anthropic doesn't want its technology used for operations including domestic surveillance and autonomous lethal activities. Anthropic and the Defense Department have been at odds for weeks over the contractual terms of how the startup's technology can be used. Now for other articles within the paper. Doctors can't agree on how to diagnose Alzheimer's. Different criteria have raised concerns that some patients are being misdiagnosed. By Samantha Reddy. Imagine you're in your late 60s and are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. You start planning the rest of your life, telling your spouse you may eventually become incapacitated, looking into long-term memory care, checking off as many bucket list items as you can. 6 months later, another neurologist finds the opposite. You don't have Alzheimer's and aren't at risk of developing it. Divergent diagnoses for Alzheimer's are the result of different criteria for diagnosing the disease. Some doctors worry the differing approaches have resulted in patients going misdiagnosed or worse, being prescribed medications with potential negative health effects. The problem highlights a larger question. How should Alzheimer's disease be defined? Is it a biological disease based solely on the presence of brain proteins? Or is it a more complicated diagnosis that involves weighing risk and other factors? The Alzheimer's Association 2024 criteria for diagnosis require evidence of the brain protein amyloid. At the International Working Group, a global consortium of neurologists and researchers, its criteria require 3 things: the presence of amyloid, tau, another biomarker of Alzheimer's disease, and cognitive symptoms. While the Alzheimer's Association criteria define the disease by amyloid pathology in the brain, it says testing and treatment should occur only if a patient has cognitive symptoms. Symptoms of Alzheimer's disease typically don't surface until about 15 years after amyloid and tau are detected in the brain, says Dr. Clifford Jack, a radiologist and professor at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. There are continuing clinical trials to determine whether people with amyloid, but without cognitive symptoms, could benefit from taking monoclonal antibodies. Until those are done, people without symptoms shouldn't be tested for amyloid and tau and shouldn't be treated in the event they get a positive test, Jack says. Some doctors say the different definitions of Alzheimer's disease are leading to estimates that are grossly inflated. Chinese pressure risks U.S. arms sale to Taiwan, by Alex Leary, Ling Ling Wei, and Michael R. Gordon, Washington. A major U.S. arms sale package for Taiwan is in limbo, following pressure from Chinese leader Xi Jinping and concerns among some in the Trump administration that green-lighting the weapons deal would derail President Trump's coming visit to Beijing, U.S. officials said. In a phone call this month with Trump, Xi urged caution on U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, the democratic, self-governing island China claims as part of its territory. Trump wants to avoid antagonizing China ahead of his visit, set for the first week of April, the officials said. Asked on Monday whether he planned to send more weapons to Taiwan, Trump said he had discussed the issue with Xi. I'm talking to him about it. We had a good conversation, and we'll make a determination pretty soon, he told reporters. We have a very good relationship with President Xi, Trump added. Beijing was angered by the $11.1 billion in arms sales for Taiwan the U.S. unveiled in December. U.S. officials had been discussing approving additional sales when Xi pressed Trump about the issue during the February 4th phone call. Trump's advisors are vacillating on the decision, said a U.S. official familiar with the arms package, who insisted that, while Xi was adamant, Trump wouldn't be pushed around by China. Trump wants to preserve a trade truce with Xi, a second U.S. official said. So the timing of an arms sale decision is being carefully considered, the person said. U.S. support for Taiwan has long been a source of friction with Beijing, which has said it is prepared to seize the island by force if necessary. An official Chinese statement on the Trump-Xi call said Taiwan is the most important issue in China-U.S. relations, and that the U.S. must handle the issue of arms sales to Taiwan with prudence. Though President Joe Biden repeatedly said the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China attacked, Trump has stuck to the long-standing policy of ambiguity about whether Washington would take military action to stop a Chinese invasion of the island. That stance is intended to deter Beijing while also dissuading Taipei from declaring formal independence. Nuclear power demand presses uranium mines by Anthony Harrop. The surge in demand for data centers and nuclear power to keep them running is stressing the global uranium supply, raising concerns about a potential shortage of fuel for reactors. World uranium production has been lower than demand for several decades, and utilities are making up the difference mostly by drawing on stockpiles. Nuclear demand is rising, and there needs to be, ultimately, more uranium purchased, said Jacob White, Exchange Traded Funds Products Director at global asset management firm Sprott, which runs the world's biggest physical uranium trust. The U.S. has the world's largest fleet of nuclear reactors, followed by China and France. And China is leading the way in new plants under construction, according to the World Nuclear Association. There are enough uranium resources globally to cover projected growth in nuclear power, but large quantities of investment are needed in exploration and production to meet future reactor requirements, the association said in its 2025 World Nuclear Fuel Report. Uranium is the primary fuel used in nuclear reactors, but it needs to be enriched by separating the more radioactive particles that create a chain reaction to release energy. That is done by converting it into a gas and spinning it at high speeds in a centrifuge. With the US and China, the two largest economies, driving nuclear energy demand, more uranium needs to be mined, converted, and enriched, analysts say. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Mamdani takes New York hostage. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani is the fresh face of America's progressive vanguard, so his policy moves are worth watching. His first big move is threatening to raise property taxes unless Democrats in Albany raise taxes on top earners and business. What an ultimatum. Fleece the rich for him, or he'll fleece them and the middle class. Mr. Mamdani on Tuesday unveiled his inaugural $127 billion budget, which he amusingly called austere. Only in New York, kids. His budget is $10 billion bigger than Florida's, though New York City's population is only 40% of the Sunshine State's. It's a $10 billion increase over this year. New York City and state are rolling in tax revenue thanks to hefty capital gains realizations and Wall Street bonuses. City revenue has doubled, and state tax revenue, excluding property taxes, is up 2/3 since 2019. Yet, tax collections haven't kept pace with political spending and government worker benefits. The city faces a $5 billion shortfall, according to Mr. Mamdani. Mind you, this shortfall is $10 billion less than the city projected a couple months ago, before a surge in income tax collections from year-end bonuses. The top 1% of New York City earners pay nearly half of the local income taxes. Yet, Mr. Mamdani wants to squeeze top earners and businesses even more to fund universal child care, free buses, and other progressive dreams. On Tuesday, he repeated his campaign call for Governor Kathy Hochul and the Democrats who run Albany to raise income taxes on millionaires by 2 percentage points and the state corporate tax to 11.5% from 7.25%. That would raise New York City's corporate tax to more than 20%, roughly double the highest state rate in the country. New Jersey's 11.5%. The combined state and city top marginal individual tax rate would rise to 16.8% for households making more than $25 million. Individuals earning more than $1 million would pay a top rate of 15.5%, more than 50% including federal tax. New Yorkers have been riding a Willy Wonka elevator to the sky since the financial panic when Democrats in Albany raised the combined top rate to 12.8% from 10.5%. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo extended the state's supposedly temporary millionaire tax again and again. In 2021, the state added 3 new top brackets and raised the top rate to 14.8%. But Mr. Mandani isn't satisfied. I believe the wealthiest individuals and the most profitable corporations should contribute a little more so that everyone can live lives of dignity, he said. If he really cares about the latter, he wouldn't bar tenants in the city's dilapidated public housing from airing complaints at his hearing on rental ripoffs, as the New York Post reported this week. Ms. Hochul has been cool to Mr. Mandani's tax pitch, no doubt recognizing it would prompt more to leave and possibly result in less revenue. Yet the mayor is trying to extort her by threatening to raise city property taxes by 9.5%, which he can do without state legislation. This would smack middle-class homeowners in the outer boroughs as well as the wealthy in Manhattan. It would also compound problems in the city's multi-family housing market caused by state rent control. Hundreds of rent-stabilized buildings have defaulted in recent years, and many are selling at discounts upward of 60% from their purchase price. Mr. Mandani's transparent goal is to raise public pressure on Albany to soak high earners. We do not want to have to turn to such drastic measures to balance our budget, Mr. Mandani said of his threatened property tax hike. But faced with no other choice, we will be forced to. There is another choice: spend less. Merely holding spending flat would eliminate this year's deficit. Mr. Mandani claims his city's wealthy can afford to pay more because Republicans in Washington have given them a windfall. But as the Empire Center for Public Policy's Bill Hammond notes, the average effective federal tax rate for New York millionaires rose 0.8 percentage points after the 2017 tax reforms because of the state and local deduction cap. Last summer's tax bill quadrupled the SALT deduction to $40,000 and blessed a state workaround for pass-through businesses, which include some top earners. But we warned Republicans this would mitigate the impact of higher state taxes and make it politically easier for progressive states to raise them. And Mr. Mandani is now proving the point. Mr. Mandani's attempt to extort Ms. Hochul over taxes is part of a broader battle in the Democratic Party. If he prevails, expect more Democrats to imitate his class warfare and hostage-taking. Xi tries to bully Trump on Taiwan. China's boss wants the U.S. to stop a sale of defensive arms to Taipei. The April summit between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, is turning out to be a high-stakes affair long before they meet. The Chinese president is trying to bully Mr. Trump into walking back planned sales of arms to Taiwan. U.S. officials are leaking that Mr. Xi was adamant in a recent phone call that Mr. Trump block further arms sales to the Democratic island of some 23 million people. The U.S. announced an $11.1 billion arms sale in December, and another is in the works. Taiwan needs the arms for self-defense as China ramps up military pressure on the territory. China's Navy has staged exercises that look to U.S. officials as preparation for what could be a blockade of Taiwan, which supplies most of the world's advanced semiconductors. Mr. Xi has told his military to be ready by 2027 to retake Taiwan by force if necessary. Mr. Xi knows the U.S. president wants a successful summit in China, and the Communist Party boss is using that as leverage. Mr. Trump wants a stable Chinese relationship so the People's Republic won't again block the export of rare earth minerals or refuse to purchase American farm goods, especially soybeans. But giving in to Mr. Xi's threats on Taiwan would send a dangerous signal about America's reliability as an ally. The Taiwan Relations Act obliges the U.S. to supply defensive weapons to the island. If Mr. Trump abdicates on that obligation, China will immediately use it to tell the Taiwanese people that America can't be trusted to defend them. Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines will also get the message that Mr. Trump's priority in the Pacific is China, not their mutual defense. No one wants a war over Taiwan, but war is more likely if Mr. Xi concludes that President Trump can be intimidated for the sake of a smiling summit. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages. How to bust the sanctions, evading ghost fleets. A 2003 coalition against illicit weapons is a model for stopping oil shipments from rogue states. By John Bolton. Economic sanctions can bring critical pressure on foreign adversaries. The record in recent years, however, is mixed. Targets actively evade sanctions and mitigate their effects. Even the most successful contemporary sanctions against Iraq in 1990 to 91 didn't reverse Baghdad's aggression against Kuwait, which required military force. Sanctions against oil exports from Iran, Russia, and Venezuela have been frustrated by ineffective enforcement. Russian aggression against Ukraine persists, and Iran still pursues nuclear weapons, supports internal terrorism, and represses its citizens. Nicolas Maduro has been captured, but his authoritarian regime remains in place. These targets all rely on oil tankers known as ghost ships or the dark fleet to reach customers, of which China is the largest, eagerly paying below market prices to rogue states. There is, however, a model to focus global attention on the ghost fleets, thereby significantly enhancing international cooperation and consolidating uneven efforts to enforce sanctions. The Proliferation Security Initiative, created under President George W. Bush, sought to eliminate international trafficking in weapons and materials of mass destruction. While rogue states like Iran, Libya, and North Korea were actively seeking to acquire deliverable nuclear weapons, and proliferation entrepreneurs like Pakistan's A.Q. Khan were active on the world stage. Mr. Bush announced the PSI in Krakow, Poland on May 31, 2003, to forge a coalition against the illicit transfer of key weapons components. Negotiations with a core group of like-minded states quickly produced a statement of interdiction principles to guide international coordination among intelligence, military, and law enforcement authorities. The benefits included helping enhance the work of counter-proliferation coalitions like the Nuclear Suppliers Group and the Missile Technology Control Regime. More than 100 countries have committed to PSI's interdiction principles. PSI is an activity, not an organization, as a British diplomat once explained. It created no new international bureaucracy and didn't require endless meetings among diplomats. It was intended to be lean and agile, essential attributes for outmaneuvering nuclear proliferators and other illicit weapon traffickers. In implementing PSI, the U.S. relied on a variety of authorities and techniques to conduct interdictions, including ship boarding agreements with flag of convenience states, which allow foreign-owned ships to register under their flag. These agreements allowed PSI inspections of ships suspected of carrying illicit cargoes. The U.S. and its allies could take a similar approach against ghost fleet tankers and other sanctions-evading vessels. Another important PSI tactic, one particularly applicable to ghost fleet tankers, is the concept of stateless vessels. These are typically ships with several flag of convenience registrations, often forged, which they change at will. A vessel can leave port under one name and flag state and appear at another with a different name and registration. Such vessels often temporarily turn off their automatic identification system transponders to evade detection. Under customary international law and the Law of the Sea Treaty, which our allies have ratified, stateless vessels may be boarded without violating a flag state's rights. Properly understood, false flag vessels, like those purportedly reflagged recently with Russian colors, are also stateless. Presumably, this is the rationale Washington employed when it recently seized the reflagged tanker Marinera on the high seas. Different states apply these principles differently. Under PSI, we could reassure allies we wouldn't press them to violate their concepts of international law. The objective of PSI 2.0 should be to sweep oil tanker ghost fleets from the seas entirely, delegitimizing them across the board by interdictions, seizures, and financial and commercial means. Sanctions alone aren't enough, but many components of a comprehensive approach already exist. These efforts could, for example, make the International Maritime Organization's transponder system truly universal, with important collateral health and safety benefits. The PSI model would get members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization working together on a priority of common interest, with NATO's unity and even its existence under threat. Eliminating the ghost fleets can strengthen the alliance's bonds while also increasing NATO operations with Asian and Pacific allies like South Korea, Japan, and Australia. Encouraging owners of ghost ships to sell them for scrap would provide some revenue as they exit a decidedly risky business. Woodrow Wilson, the most prominent modern proponent of sanctions, wasn't squishy, calling sanctions a hand upon the throat of the offending nation and a peaceful, silent, deadly remedy that will not cost a life outside of the nation boycotted, but which apply pressure that, in my judgment, no modern nation could resist. A century later, surely we can find ways to make this Wilsonian formulation prevail against ghost fleets and their sponsors. Can Newsom live down his record? He wouldn't be the only Democratic governor whose state is an economic mess. By Karl Rove. At last week's Munich Security Conference, Gavin Newsom told the assembled world leaders that Donald Trump is temporary. He'll be gone in 3 years. The California governor is right that Mr. Trump won't be president after January 20th, 2029. But the effects of his presidency will remain long after he departs the Oval Office. The same is true for Mr. Newsom. He's out as governor next January 4th. But the effects of his 8 years as California's chief executive will linger as well. The difference is that judgments of Mr. Trump's presidency will be for the history books. The verdict on Mr. Newsom's record will have immediate electoral consequences if he tries to succeed Mr. Trump. It will give Mr. Newsom an awful lot to overcome. Mr. Newsom has the distinction of being the first governor of California since statehood in 1850 to see the state's congressional delegation shrink from 53 representatives to 52 after the 2020 census. The state is expected to lose another 4 to 5 House seats after the 2030 reapportionment. Why? Because the Golden State no longer has the quality of life that was long a gigantic magnet for jobs and commerce. The Census Bureau estimates the state's population actually declined from April 2020 to July 2025. The U.S. News and World Report's annual Best States ranking puts California at number 32 on its economy, 42 on fiscal stability, 45 on growth, 46 on employment, and dead last for opportunity. The state's foundation's 2025 State Tax Competitiveness Index ranked California 48th overall. Only New Jersey and New York have worse tax systems. California was ranked 49th for taxes on individuals, 46th for sales taxes, and 41st for corporate taxes. California's problems go beyond taxes and a lackluster economy. U.S. News ranked the state 36th in pre-K to 12 education and 43rd on public safety. Only Hawaii has a higher cost of living, according to the World Population Review. Drawing on the Bureau of Labor Statistics state-by-state price indexes, the virtual capitalist average grocery cost index pegged California as the nation's third most expensive state in July 2025. Only Hawaii and Alaska whose isolation requires expensive shipping, cost more. Then there's housing. Using Redfin data, Forbes found in September that the median California home cost $906,500, nearly twice the national average of $462,206. Only Hawaii and the District of Columbia were more expensive. No wonder California's population growth has stalled. If Mr. Newsom does run, his opponents, Democrats in the primary, and if he wins the nominee, the Republican in the general election, will make sure voters know about his stewardship of the Central Valley High-Speed Rail Project. After 15 years and nearly $7 billion in federal funding, workers haven't laid a foot of track. Mr. Newsom's only comfort is that he wouldn't be the only Democratic hopeful with home state problems to overcome. Under Governor J.B. Pritzker, Illinois is, in many ways, also a failing state. In the U.S. News Best State Rankings, it was number 35 for opportunity, 42 for economy, and last for long-term fiscal stability. In Ronald Reagan's 1980 campaign for the White House, he emphasized he had been California's two-term governor, confident Americans would take that as evidence of his leadership abilities. It was crucial to his ultimate victory. California was then a state of enormous opportunity. Mr. Newsom has great hair, and Mr. Pritzker a vast fortune, but neither will matter nearly as much as their records as governor. Neither man can credibly claim that he has a solid record of economic achievement. That may not matter much to Democratic primary voters. It will in November 2028. The Pepper and Salt cartoon today shows a young boy and girl at the seashore, and the boy is holding up a shell. And he says, "Hold it up to your ear, and you can hear an oil rig leaking." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 19th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.